welcome back to my channel. Suhail this side. So this would be the fourth video in the multi-threading 0 to hero series. So in this video we will discuss the interview problem which is being commonly asked in most of the top companies. The problem is printing the numbers from 1 to n using n threads. For simplicity, as you are seeing on the screen, the numbers are representing from 1 to 10, right? So these numbers have to be printed in a round robin fashion by n threads. For simplicity, you can take an example using two threads, for example thread 1 and thread 2. So thread 1 would get print 1, and then thread 2 would print 2, then again thread 1 would print 3, then again thread 2 would print 4. So this is how you have to print the numbers in a round robin fashion by using two threads. So how we can solve this problem using, because there are two threads but the threads have to print the number one by one. For example, one thread 1 has printed 1, then it has to notify the other thread, okay, now it is your turn to print the number, right? So for example, in the Java we have the wait and notify methods, right? In the synchronized block, which we have already discussed in the last video. So how we can approach this problem is, we have already started two threads, for example, and out of two threads, one of the thread would be in waiting state and the other thread would be in running state. And once that thread prints their number, the job is done, that thread has to notify the other thread, okay, now it is your turn to print the number. So without wasting time, let's get started how we can write the code for it. So I have just created the package for it, right? So I'll just for simplicity, we'll solve this problem step by step. For example, firstly we'll solve this problem using two threads, right? Now I have just created the package with the version 1, the v1, so that we can segregate the code when we will solve this problem using n threads, right? Now how we can approach this kind of problems in any kind of multi-threading problems, how we can approach is, so the number printer, right, it is a kind of shared resource, right? So it is a kind of shared resource. What its job is to print the number. Now what are the number series? It has the starting point and the ending point. So for that I'll just declare two variables, the start num and the end num, right, which would represent the starting number and the ending number. I'll just declare the variables in the constructor. Now what happens actually I have seen in most of the interviews how candidates approach these kind of problems. For example, they have already given the problem, okay, you have to print these numbers using two threads. So what they do usually is they write two methods, right? First thread is responsibility is printing the odd number and the other thread would print the even number. So this is how most of the candidates I have seen, even senior candidates, solving the problem in same way, right? So these both methods have to be synchronized because there are multiple threads who are simultaneously try to access the same critical section. So what we need to do, we need to print the number from start till the end. So that means simply we need to have a loop, right? So we need to have a loop from starting till ending number, right? Now what other things we need to do? Now this print odd would print the odd number only. So it means if thread is coming whose responsibility is to print the even number, that thread should wait. So how we can do that? We can do that by simply using the modulus operator, right? So start num mod 2, right, is equal to 0. It means the number is even, right? So in this case what would happen? The thread should wait, right? So it should wait in this case, right? So that is what I have written here, right? So if the even thread comes here, in this case it should wait. If the odd thread comes, what it will do? It will print the number, right? So thread dot current thread dot get name, right? So and we can do the start number. Once it is done, it has to do the increment the start number, right? Now similar kind of logic we have to write in the even number printing this even method as well. But here the condition would be if odd thread comes here, so it has to wait. That is start number mod 2 is equal to 1. That is the remainder is 1. Then this thread should wait, right? So that is the simple program. And once the thread is in the waiting state, as we have seen, if thread 1 is in the waiting state, right, and it has or thread 2 is in the running state, but now what is the responsibility of thread 1? Thread 1 has to print the next number, right? So this thread 2 has to notify, right, so that the thread 1 would come into the running state and thread 2 would go into the waiting state, and the process will keep on happening. Then when the thread 1 would print the number, again thread 1 would notify this thread 1 would notify the other thread which is in the waiting state, and thread 2 would come in running state, and thread 1 again will go into the waiting state. So this process will keep on continuously happening, right? So for that, what we need to do, we need to just include the notify method, right? Now in this case, the when the odd thread has just printed the odd number, it would notify the other thread which is waiting for printing the even number. Now this our shared resource job is done. Now let's write the main client, how we can do that, right? So in this we'll just do the public static void main, just create the object for the shared resource, right? Number printer. Now start number, let's assume as of now is the 1 and the ending number is 20. Now we have to create the threads, right? For example, the odd thread, right? And here we are just creating the, in this thread constructor we need to pass the runnable interface implementation. I am using the functional interface kind of thing whose job is to print the odd number. That is done. Now similar kind of thing we need to do for the even number as well, right? So this thread would print the even number. Now at the last, what we need to do, odd thread dot start and even thread dot start, right? Now our job is done. Let's run this program and see how it is behaving, right? Now let's run this program and see. I'll just show you. Okay, now thread 0 is printing 1, thread 1 is printing 2, thread 0 is again printing 3, but if you see at the end, thread 0 is printing 21. Why it is so? Why it is so? If you see the program, right? If you see the program, so we have introduced the while start number is less than end number. So this condition has already been evaluated and one of the thread is already in the waiting state, right? One of the thread is already in the waiting state, and once it gets notified, from where it would start? It would start directly from here, right? It would directly start from here. So this condition is no more getting evaluated. The start number is less than end number. This condition is no more getting evaluated. So for this, to solve this problem, what we need to do? We need to do the if start num is greater than end num, we need to do just the break, right? So this is how we can solve this problem. Now let's run the code again, right? Let's run the code again and see what is the result. Now if you see, thread 0 is printing 1, thread 1 is printing 2, and so on, and at the last thread 1 is printing 20. Now our job is done. Now our job is done, but if you see, there are two methods. One is for printing the odd number and the other one is for printing the even numbers. But what happens actually in interviews, the interviewer follow-up question could be, okay, convert this two methods into a one method, right? So for that, what we need to do, for example, the printing odd and even number should be done by a single method. It should not be two methods, right? What we can do is, I'm just copying both the classes into the v2 package, right? What I will do in this case, for example, the number printer, what I will do, I'll just renaming this print num. Now what we need to do is, we need to do the avoid this, and we need to handle the odd and even condition. The values, possible values, what we need to handle, the modulus operator 2, right? Somehow we need to evaluate this condition. This condition should be 0 for even number, right? It should wait in case of, there are two values actually, 0 or 1, right? So if the job is for printing the even number, right? So the odd thread should wait. right, in that case. So for that, what we can do is, here if I pass the thread id, right, some kind of logic. For example, the thread id is there, right? The thread id could be, you can assume, the 0 or 1. This thread id should be 0 or 1, right? So if I do this case, right, if thread id is equal to 0 or 1, so what would happen? And for example, our starting number is 1, right? So what I can do here is, one more condition I can impose is the starting number minus 1. Why I am doing so? Because the starting number minus 1 is, either you can put the old condition or you can do the this condition. Now the starting number is 1. 1 minus 1, 0 mod 2, right? In the first iteration, what it would be? 0 mod 2, right? What would be the value? Is the 0, right? So if, for example, if the thread id is 0, right, if the thread id is 0, right, if the thread id is 0, right, it should not wait in this case, right, because 1 has to be printed by the thread 0 only, right? It should not wait in this case. What would happen actually? Thread 1 should go and print the number, right? And similarly, if, for example, 0 mod 2, right, 0 mod 2 is 1 and thread id is 1, right? Thread id is still 0, right? Thread id is still 0. So what should happen in this case, right? 0 mod, not 0 mod 2, sorry, 1 mod 2 is 1, right? That is an odd number, and thread id is 0, but it is not a responsibility for printing this thread, right? It is a responsibility for printing the other thread, right? So this is how we can solve this problem. Now we just need to do the changes here. So here initially we were doing this case. Now what we'll do, we just do the I'm just declaring int number of threads is equal to 2, right? And here I can just iterate this for loop for number of threads, and I can do is this one, right? Print num. And what I can do is, I can just final int thread id is equal to I, right? And I can print the thread id here, right? And we can change this to thread, and at the end what we need to do is thread dot start, right? So simple, right? What we do, what changes we have done, we have just iterate the loop, right? We have just written the for loop for I is equal to 0 to number of threads, and here we have passed the thread id. Thread id is 0 and the 1, right? Now thread id is 0 and 1. Why I have done in such a way? Because here if the thread id is 0, right, and what the thread id 0 would print, it should print 1, right? It should print 1. Those starting number, what it was at the evening, the starting number was what, right? In the first iteration the start number was 1, so 1 minus 1 is 0, right? So in this case, right, the start number minus 1, right, 1 minus 1 0, 0 mod 2 is equal to 0, thread id 0, it should run, right? Similarly, if you see thread start number when it becomes 2, right, when the start number becomes 2, so it would becomes 1 mod 2, right? And if the thread id becomes 0, right, if the thread id comes 0, then it should wait in that case, right? It should wait in that case. If not equal to, that is why we have written logic in such a way, if start number minus 1 mod 2 is not equal to thread id, right, it should wait, right? If thread id is 1, that means it is matching, and it should print the number, right? So simple. Let's run this program and we'll see the output. Let's run this program. So again, what is the result? Again, thread 0 is printing 1, thread 1 is printing 2, thread 0 is again printing 3, and so on. In the round robin fashion, the result is getting printed. Now interviewer follow-up question could be, okay, now extend this program to n threads, right? Now how you would do this? It's a very simple case. I'll just again copy paste into the v3, right? What I will do, sorry, I've just moved it. I'll just copy and paste, right? I'll just copy paste, right? What I will do in this case, now the number printer is already there. What now, the factor, the variable factor is what? earlier this 2 was hard coded, right? This 2 was hard coded. Why we have 2 hard coded? Because we assumed the number of threads could be true, but now this is also a variable. The number of threads is also a variable. How we can get this variable? In the constructor itself, right? If we have the private int number of threads, right? If we have this, and in the constructor we have number of threads, right? And this dot num threads, right? Instead of this, what we can do is we can just change this. Our job is done. Now we have, what we have done, we have just tweaked the variable, the hard coded value 2, we have just replaced it with the number of threads. Now here what we'll do is number of threads, let's assume the number of threads are 5 in this case. Now here what we need to pass, we need to pass the number of threads as well, right? Now rest of the code is still same. Now let's run the code, same code again, and let's see the result, how it is behaving in this case, right? So in this case, now if you see thread 0 and thread 1, right, is printing 1 and 2. Now the other threads are not getting chance. Why it is so? Now if you see here, we have used the notify method. What actually we have to use, right? We have to use the notify all method here, right? So that the other threads would also get a chance to print the number, right? So let's run the program again. How we can, let's see the behavior again for this using 5 threads. Now if you see here, thread 0 is printing 1, thread 1 is printing 2, thread 2 is printing 3, thread 3 is printing 4, thread 4 is printing 5, and again thread 0 is printing 6, thread 1 is printing 7, and so on. But at the end, if you see here, the program is still running. Why it is so? It should terminate because our job is done, right? Our job is done, it should terminate. And also we have placed the condition here as well. If you see, earlier also we have seen this, but here we have placed the condition as well, but still our program is not getting terminated. Why it is so, right? So why it is so, here what we need to do is, now let's consider the case here. What is our while loop? While loop is the start number is less than equal to end number, right? Start number is less than equal to end number. No, what is happening? All the threads, the remaining threads after the 20, whoever has printed thread 4 has printed 20, all the remaining threads are in the waiting. For example, let's assume this is the, right? Now thread 4 has printed the thread 4 has printed the number 20, but all the rest of the threads are still in the waiting queue, right? Even though we are notifying, right, we have notified, but if you see here, no, who would notify this? But because let's assume thread 4 is already terminated, right? It has notified all, but all the threads get a chance, but still the start number is incremented in such a way that it is not going inside the while loop. Now in this case, all the threads have incremented, and what has happened, the start number is already, for example, is already incremented. In this case, all the threads are in the waiting state, but your start number, right, start number is, let's assume 20 has already been printed, but your start number could be 24 because we have 4 threads in the waiting state. Now all the threads would not be able to be notified. No one is notifying this thread. So how we can solve this problem? This is a very simple solution for this. What we can do is, instead of putting this condition here, we can add this condition here, right? And we can have the AND condition, and here we can do the true, while true condition, right? Because why I am doing in such a way? Because somehow I have to keep notifying the threads, right? I have to keep notifying the threads, because earlier what was my condition? The condition was initially only at the while loop. Now the thread which has already run, right, which has already run, but no other thread is there who is trying to notify it, right? No thread is notifying the other threads. That is where the problem is actually. Now let's run this program again and let's see, right? So is it working or not? Let's see. So if you see here, now all the threads are printed and my program is terminated, right? So this is how you tackle all these problems, right? So you can see, so simple, but still many of the candidates I have seen in the interviews, they fumble when we ask or interviewer asks these kind of questions. So first thing, go step by step, right? Just take a deep breath and start thinking how we can uh, change the hard coded constants into variables and what kind of logic we can place, right? So that was all I had planned to cover. So in the next video we'll see the producer consumer problem, and that would set as a base for the LLD problem, which we will discuss designing the message queue problem, right? So the next video would also be very important, which would set up as a base for the message queue LLD, the similar kind of message queue, or you can assume the Kafka kind of, we will design the Kafka in the LLD problem with the proper oops and with the proper solid principles using the multi-threaded, right? So that was all, and please do hit like, subscribe, comment on my channel if you really like my explanation. Thanks a ton. See you in next video. Thanks.